when faith is lost and my hope exhausted, you will be my strength. When my mind says I'm not good enough, God, you're enough for me. I've decided I'm not giving up. You won't give up on me. You won't give up on me. Your love is holding on and it won't let go. I feel it breaking out like an echo. Your love is holding on and it won't let go. I feel it breaking out like an echo, echo in my soul. In every season, you keep repeating promises to me. Now there's no stopping what you have started until it is complete. When my mind says I'm not good enough, God, you're enough for me. I've decided I'm not giving up. You won't give up on me. You won't give up on me. Your love is holding on and it won't let go. I feel it breaking out like an echo. Your love is holding on and it won't let go. I feel it breaking out like an echo, echo in my When my mind says I'm not good enough, God, you're enough for me. I've decided I'm not giving up. You won't give up on me. You won't give up on me. Your love is holding on and it won't let go. I feel it breaking out like an echo. Your love is holding on and it won't let it go now. Feel it breaking out, breaking out. Your love is holding on and it won't let go. I feel it breaking out like an echo. Your love is holding on and it won't let it go now. Feel it breaking out like an echo, echo in my The love of our God will never give up on us, and we can thank Him for that tonight. We serve a God who is faithful forever, who's famous for doing the impossible. We give Him praise as we sing. There is no fear, believe. There is no doubt, 'cause I have seen your faithfulness, my fortress, over and over. I have a hope found in your name. I have a strength found in your grace, your faithfulness, my fortress, over and over. Make way through the waters, walk me through the ask or think, Lord, you will never fail. Your name is powerful, your words unstoppable. All things are possible. We sing this together and say, God of exceedingly, God of abundantly, more than we ask or think, Lord, you will never fail. Your name is powerful, your words unstoppable. All things are possible. Yeah. Make way through the waters, walk me through the fire. Do what you are famous for, what you are famous for. Shut the mouth of lions, bring dry bones to life. Do what you are famous for, what you are famous for. I believe in you. I believe in you.
Let's lift up the name of Jesus. Tonight in this next song, let's take a second just to remember the power that is found in the name of Jesus because of the cross. I cast my mind to Calvary, where Jesus bled and died for me. As I see his wounds or his hands, his feet, my Savior on that cursed tree. Oh, tonight we remember you, Jesus. His body bound and drenched in tears, then laid him down in Joseph's tomb. The entrance sealed, oh, by heavy stone. Our Messiah is still and all alone. Let's lift our hands to honor him. You sing this out. You're so praise the name of the Lord. Oh, praise his name. Praise his name forever. For endless days we will worship you, Jesus. Endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. Let's lift up a shout of praise in this place for our King. Then on the third happy break of dawn, we know the Son of Heaven rose again. Oh, trample death, where is your sting? The angels roar for Christ the King. Yes. Oh, praise the name of the Lord. Oh, praise his name. Praise his name forever. Yes, we will worship you, Jesus. Forever days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. He's gonna turn in robes of white, the blazing sun. Yeah, we believe that I will rise among the saints with my gaze fixed on Jesus' face. People of God, tonight we look to the word that says, for whoever shall call upon the name shall be saved. Tonight, our hope, our foundation is found only in the name of Jesus. So let's surrender to that. Would you take a second just to lift your hands as we declare this? As we put our minds on our King who's coming back again, we sing this out.
Jesus, Jesus,
Oh, high name. surrender tonight. By lifting anthems of praise in this place. Is our God. Oh, hear your people worship, worship, worship you, Jesus. Yes, how great is our God. Oh, sing with me, how great is our God. And all will see how. Yes, we're believing that everyone will know. Great is our God. Let's declare name above all names. And you're the name above all names. You're so worthy, worthy, worthy of all. So we give you our worship. And here's my heart will sing. How great is our God. Oh, we sing name above. You're the name above all names. You are worthy of all praise. So my heart will sing. My heart will sing. How great is our God. How great you are. And how great is our God. Sing how great you are, Jesus. No one's higher. And all will see how great is our God. One more time, you lift that up tonight in this place. Yes, how great. Every voice is.
Let's thank God, can we? I'm excited that you're here tonight. I do believe that this is the beginning to light a fire in New Mexico, to change everything that we've been doing. I really do believe that, and I believe this is the beginning that all the libs and the Dems ought to be careful about, because you know what, we're waking up and we're going to make changes. And the gentleman with us, you may be seated, you can be seated. The gentleman with us tonight has become a great friend. He's also one of the most prolific voices in America today. Yes. And he just, the way God uses him is absolutely incredible. I've been amazed when I listen to him, how he articulates the message of the gospel with what's going on in the culture. And I'm in awe of it. I'm like, man, God, you've given this guy such incredible wisdom. And so would you please help me welcome to Albuquerque, New Mexico, at Legacy Church, Charlie Kirk. Wow, what a great night. Charlie, thanks for being here.
Thank you. I got to tell you, Steve, you're one of my favorite pastors in the country, and you are all so blessed to have a pastor like Steve Smothermon. I'll tell you what. And I've had an opportunity to speak at over 100 churches across the country, and if we had 100, 200 more Steve Smothermons, this country would be in a much better place. Your courage deserves to be applauded, truly.
Thank you, man.
And I'm honored to call you a friend.
Very kind. So today, I've got some questions I'm going to ask Charlie Kirk, and then at the end, he's going to take some questions. And just so you know, we'll give you some direction. You'll line up here, and then we have someone that'll hold the mic. You don't get to hold the mic. And if I don't think the question is appropriate, I'm just going to move on, okay? So no crazy stuff. We don't do that in here, this house. We do everything decently and in order. And you say, well, how do I know if it's crazy? If I tell you it's crazy, it's crazy. Is that okay?
You're the man, Steve. I got to take him on the road with me. So.
But anyway, he will take questions. So as you're, sitting, listening to him talk, if you have questions, write them down. It'll be easier for you when you come up and ask, because sometimes people get nervous, and that's okay. But we're going to have a great night. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Here we go. All right, Charlie, what is the great reset that people are talking about today?
It's one of the most important things that we as believers educate ourselves on. Because if you were just looking at the news and you're confused, you're having the proper reaction. It seems as if the people in charge are doing what they're doing intentionally. Whether it be double-digit inflation, the borders are wide open, we have train robberies. It seems as if there's this inexplicable assault on early treatments for COVID. It seems as if you're like, why would they be doing all of this? Well, as soon as you educate yourself on the Great Reset, all of a sudden it starts to make sense. And so the Great Reset is something that the World Economic Forum, which is a group of billionaires and world leaders and celebrities get together every single year in Davos, Switzerland. They came together with what they want the world to look like in the year 2030. Now, you guys can fact check me on all of this. It's on their website. That's why I always laugh at kind of people that do conspiracy theories. I say, you don't need to get into that. Just look at their website, okay? You don't have to go find this deeper agenda. They're literally saying by 2030, the World Economic Forum, you will own nothing and you'll be happier than ever. They say that we will live in a borderless society. They say that America will lose its position as a superpower on the world stage. And you read it point by point. There's 10 promises by year 2030, and then you look at what's currently happening in the country, you realize, oh, this is a transition that we're living through. You have to understand the chaos that is hurting your bottom line. When you go to the grocery store and you can't afford just regular meat anymore, when you can't afford to fill up your tank of gas, it's all intentional. Because you're living through their attempt to transition us from a constitutional republic to a borderless, internationalist, globalist experiment. Now, the Bible tells us that this is actually a sign of the end times, but that doesn't mean we have to accept it. In fact, that would be a really, really bad thing for the country and for the world. And so you look at the agenda that they're putting forward, they want to try to break the system. So, for example, 80% of all dollar bills ever created have been created in the last 2 years. So if you think you've lived through inflation so far, wait until the next 6 to 9 months to 12 months come in. Not to mention the rise in crime and all these other things. And the only way you can make sense of it is if they actually want to try to use this chaos and confusion to get somewhere else. And it's tempting at times to say the following. It's tempting to say, oh, these people, they don't know what they're doing. That's partially true. I mean, we could go through some specifics of that, especially of a certain person that I think we could all think of. But the broader agenda is they know exactly what they're doing, that debasing a currency is nothing new. I mean, every third world goes through a currency reset every 10 to 15 years. They want to try to remove the US dollar as the strategic global reserve for currency. They want to try to create a system where there are no borders whatsoever. Well, if you have no borders, you have no countries. You have one world. It's that simple. I hate to kind of boil it down, but if there's no differences between the two countries and you can just kind of go as you please, they've tried this in Europe the last 20 or 30 years, and they're deteriorating sovereignty, ever so rapidly. So what does this mean for all of us as we kind of look at this all being put into place? Well, they want to try and destroy the citizen. So there's a tension, right? And you're seeing this happen right now in Canada, which is like one of the coolest stories ever, by the way. And if you don't know what's happening in Canada, I'll get you up to speed in just a second, which is most people in the history of humanity, you were usually a subject, a serf, or a slave. You're usually one of those three things. Subject under a king, a serf on a farm, or a slave. The American project started something unique and something new and something biblical, which was a citizen. A citizen is completely different than a subject, a serf, and a slave. Actually, a citizen comes from a Greek word that means co-owner or co-ruler. It's someone where all of a sudden you turn the pyramid upside down, where it's not that the rulers are able to do what they want to do, it's that they work for us. It's totally different. Now, citizenship is hard. You know why? You have to stay engaged, you have to stay involved, you have to know when to vote no for things, even though it sounds really good, because that actually deteriorates your power. It's tempting to want to be a subject instead of a citizen. I'll give you an example. It's tempting to want to vote for stimulus checks to come into your mailbox every single month. I get it, but it comes at a cost. You know that. You have to deteriorate your currency. You have to take it from somebody else. It's actually more mature to say, you know what, I'm going to take care of my family, and absent people that really need the government help, I'm going to say no to that. That's really hard, actually, to run against that. But we know that the same hand that gave everybody stimulus checks a year and a half ago is the same hand that keeps the mask on your 9-year-old daughter.
Yeah, come on.
Same hand. Because you're like, oh, well, that felt good when I got that check in the mail. Well, does it feel good when they make you take a vaccine against your will? You see, this is what we must recognize, that the hand that feeds you is also the hand that can keep you metaphorically enslaved. And so what's happening in Canada is one of the most inspiring and positive stories that I've seen. Canada's a super polite country. I love Canadians, by the way. They're really nice and likable and magnanimous and agreeable. To get them to protest about anything is very unusual. They also are very compliant. They will do what they are told. So Canadians did what they were told the last couple of years. They shut down their churches, they shut down their schools. I have friends in Ottawa and Toronto and Banff, and they say, Charlie, we still don't have restaurants open. You know, we're allowed takeout only, still all across Canada. But Justin Trudeau, who is kind of the best example of an autocrat boy king who has pushed too far, all of a sudden has realized that even Canadians, in a country that is very large geographically, but has only about the population of California, about 36 million people, even they can push too far. And one of the most amazing things that has happened the last couple of days is this theme that is rejecting the Great Reset, which all of a sudden you're seeing Canadians say, I don't want to be a subject, a serf, or a slave. I want to be a citizen.
Come on.
And you're seeing that happen all across Canada. Now, they're waving Canadian flags. They have these amazing signs that say, drop the mandates, we want our sovereignty back. And this is a tension, and this tension is biblical, by the way. Everything we are living through is first spiritual, that then manifests itself in the physical. The idea that you want to be taken care of through lies and deception, Satan would love to have you believe that. The idea that you might have sovereignty, that you might have autonomy, that you might have agency, that you could provide for your family, that you have independence from someone being able to control you, that's a biblical struggle going as old as the garden. And so we understand this in the West. In America, we get it better than most. But, you know, in 2021, it started as a pretty dark year. I think we can all agree. And I'm sure I could go through this entire room of people that have lost their jobs because of vaccine mandates, people whose children have been discriminated against because of COVID policy in schools, people that have lost friends and lost family members, people that know small business owners that will never open again. 2021 was a metaphorical bloodbath for the American experience. It just was. But something happened in the second part of 2021 that is now continuing, and the momentum is only accelerating, which is that instead of giving up, normal people decided to reassert the American ideal of a citizen. So, for example, they started to show up at school board meetings across the country. They started to ask questions of their local educators. They started to say, wait a second, why are you teaching this like fringe critical race theory thing? Meanwhile, my 6-year-old can't read. Like, why are you keeping schools closed? And how did the regime respond? Well, they responded by calling moms and dads who show up at school board meetings domestic terrorists. That's how the Federal Bureau of Investigation / Department of Justice classified many of you who have showed up to complain about your kids' education. But then another amazing thing happened, is that the meetings had more people show up after they called moms and dads domestic terrorists. And wrongfully, might I add. And it continued. And so now we're in this year where not just in America, but also worldwide, we are seeing the rise of the citizen. Now, that comes at a cost. If you decide to be a citizen, that means you largely can't blame other people for your problems. If you decide to be a citizen, you have to know a lot about your country. If you decide to be a citizen, that means you have to make hope happen. That means you have to go make something happen if you see something wrong around you. It's easier to be a subject. But what I see here in New Mexico, because make no mistake, you have lived under an oppressive regime here in New Mexico. One of the worst states in the country when it comes to COVID tyranny and authoritarianism. And I don't say that lightly, and you know I'm not one to try to play into people believing that they're victims, but you have been abused by your government here in New Mexico. But you look around here tonight, and you look all across this state, people are starting to wake up and push back. And so what's happening, though, Steve, is an unexpected development that will jeopardize the Great Reset agenda. And I think we really have momentum on our side.
I couldn't have said it any better. No, I couldn't have said it at all. Yeah, you know what? And he's right. You know, when we talk about the oppression, and that's what we fight against. And so if you look around here today, all of you guys are standing up for your rights as citizens and said, we're not buying into this. I mean, we're violating the mandate right now.
Well, and that's an important thing, which is, you know, who works for who, right? So when your natural rights are violated, you as a Christian have a biblical responsibility to then say, I'm going to protect my rights more than obeying some, arbitrary regime. So you might say, well, Charlie, give me an example of a right that we shouldn't allow to be violated. How about this? You should be allowed to go to church. It's pretty simple. You should be allowed to have an open church and worship your Creator. And so I would actually say you might be defying some sort of piece of paper. I can never remember your governor's name because she doesn't have a name worth remembering. And so
I agree with that too, so yeah.
Which is, she is violating the moral contract. You are obeying the moral contract. It's very important to make that clear.
So when we talk about believers and standing up for our rights, what does the Bible say about getting involved? I know you touched on it, but what should we do? I mean, it's more specifically, what should we biblically do as believers?
Yeah, some people believe that the church or Christian should not comment ever about local politics or about being a citizen. They say, all we do is the gospel and we don't get engaged in those sorts of things. Well then, there's a lot of verses that they're going to have to explain with that sort of a position. Jeremiah 29:7, demand the welfare of the nation or the city of which you are in, because your welfare is tied to your nation's welfare. That's the Lord speaking in Jeremiah 29:7. Now, in every church you'll go to, you'll probably hear Jeremiah 29:11, which is one of the most quoted scriptures, for I know the plans I have laid in front of you. But rarely do you hear about Jeremiah 29:7, which is a commandment to care about what's happening in the local nation or city. Not to mention Daniel, Esther, Mordecai, Nehemiah, Jeremiah, and let's just focus on Daniel in particular. Daniel fasted and prayed for the well-being of the nation that he was in. And so Daniel was faced with a choice that the American church was faced with, that Steve Smothermon was faced with, that Legacy Church was faced with. It was the Daniel trial. And I'll tell you, before we go any further, 98% of American churches failed the Daniel trial. And the Daniel trial was very clear. In Daniel 6, there was a conspiracy, a legitimate conspiracy, kind of launched against Daniel, where I forget the names of certain individuals that then lobbied King Nebuchadnezzar, basically saying, we don't like this Daniel guy, he has too much influence, kind of like the American church, isn't it? And we don't like what they're doing, so we're going to pass a series of measures that are in defiance to Old Testament commandments from the Torah, and Daniel's going to have to choose whether or not to obey God or to obey this government edict. And one of the orders was that you are not able to pray in a certain capacity, especially in public and facing the city. So Daniel hears about this, and the scriptures tell us that Daniel was grieved by it, but then Daniel made a conscious decision. Daniel opened up the window for all to see, and he intentionally disobeyed the government and the king's orders, and he prayed to the city for all the people to see. So that was an act of what would be first called Old Testament civil disobedience. That's the equivalent of you being here at church tonight. Now, all of you know the story of Daniel in the lion's den. That's how he got in the lion's den. We don't always talk about that. Like, oh yeah, he's in the lion's den and God delivered him from that. And of course, that's the other part of the story, is that God will never forsake his children when you obey his commands. Yep. And that's a very important thing. And so Daniel decided to obey God and not obey this immoral act to go against God's commandments, and he was blessed by that. But there are multiple examples all throughout the scriptures of people doing actions for God's purpose in secular government. One that I think that we also need to really need to take to heart is all throughout the New Testament, Paul writes multiple times about government, and there's one in particular that I think is a misquoted scripture. And we've talked about it when I've visited here before, but repetition is the soul of memory, and it's important that we kind of really dive back into this. The longest part of the New Testament that focuses on government is Romans 13. And Romans 13, if I were to paraphrase it, is submit to all rulers and authority because they are there for your good. Okay, so a simple reading would say, that means, Steve, you are not allowed to defy the governor of the governor of New Mexico's orders. And therefore, they will say to Steve, 98% of American churches will say that Steve is in defiance to Romans 13. But let's take this from a constitutional perspective. So you look at the Constitution, you first must ask, who is the sovereign? Who gets the power in the constitutional system, right? Who is in charge? Who is the ruler? Is it the governor, the mayor, the city councilman, the school board, the dog catcher, the president, Congress, the judge? No, it's the people. So that's that's an unprecedented development, isn't it? So you look at the United States Constitution, in every country, this can apply differently. So defying government orders in China would be different than America. But Steve, you are still in America, as distant New Mexico might feel from it at times.
This is the People's
Republic of New Mexico,
yeah.
And so if you look at the Constitution, it says, we the people are the sovereign. And then we give up our power, right, voluntarily through elections, through a principle that is a biblical principle called the consent principle, consent to the governed, right? We give you our power to then form a government, to form an infrastructure to do what you will. And so, but when pastors say you're violating Romans 13, they have it completely backwards. When in reality, it's the governors or the mayors that are imposing these edicts and these mandates. They're in violation of Romans 13 because you are the sovereign in this country. What a gift our founding fathers gave us, isn't it? That our framers gave us, that they gave us a constitutional republic that is perfectly harmonic and consistent with the scriptures.
And so we should stand up and fight then. We should take our stand. We should say, listen, this is a violation of my freedoms, my religious freedoms, my ability to worship God, and we should be able to say no.
Yeah, amen. And we should do it in a Christ-like way. We should do it 100% grace and 100% truth. And it says in 1 Timothy, one of the last things that Paul wrote was that we need to pray for our leaders by name for the struggles that they are experiencing. Every person should be doing that. We believe in the supernatural intercessory power, the intervention of prayer. It's not just some sort of therapeutic exercise. We should be praying for our leaders by name, that their hearts will be moved. We should also fast for our nation. Remember, Jesus says the hard things come to those who fast and pray. And we should be fasting continually for our nation, as Daniel also did as well. But this is something that's really important, that I think that some Christians kind of engage in a doctrine and a theology of intentionally passive Christianity. Now, this is a really interesting balance that I think we need to strike, which is that we should not seek, conflict in any way whatsoever. However, Steve, you know this, that if someone tries to shut down the church, or if someone tries to come after the bride of Christ, or spiritually you come under attack, are we ever commanded, ever, to roll over and just take it? Absolutely not. We are in Ephesians, the armor of God is there for us for a very particular reason. In fact, we are called through Christ's teachings to make disciples of all nations, to occupy till he comes. And this is a tension right now in the American church where 98%, or it could be 99% of American churches, they failed the Daniel test. And the Daniel test was, they're going to do what they're told. But we should do so lovingly and compassionately and magnanimously. And this church has been a phenomenal example of that. This church, despite being persecuted by the government, has continued aid of the local community, healing the sick, counseling the disadvantaged, and that is the role of the church. And so never should we become bitter or callous, and we should also have a heart for forgiveness. I know Steve. He's an amazing Christian. And if the governor came here and asked Steve for forgiveness, he would grant it to her. Truly and honestly ask for forgiveness. Because we are all forgiven. And we are told in the scriptures that if we actually harbor unforgiveness, it creates into bitterness. And also that is a vector for Satan to be able to control our lives. And so, look, this is something I think we as Christians must recognize and realize, that we must fight and contest for righteousness. There's a way to fight and contest for righteousness in a Christ-like way and an un-Christ-like way. This church has done it in such an amazing way, I have to say that. But it's also, we should never allow things that are untrue to be tolerated by us. Because some people say, Charlie, where is your tolerance? Look, I for one believe we are all sinners. I think that some people, really need Jesus in their life, totally. But we should be open to sinners always coming in reconciliation and communion with Christ. We should never be tolerant of sin itself. That's a very, very important distinction. Is that if we see someone sinning around us, isn't it the loving thing to do to take them aside and to intervene? And an example of this that shouldn't offend most people, but it probably will, is that if you know someone with an alcohol problem, and you know that if you don't counsel them or intervene, you might be worried they might hurt themselves and hurt other people. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is tell the truth to someone who needs it.
Yes, and so when we engage, you said Christ-like, and I don't know that I've personally been always Christ-like. I mean, because I think her name is Wicked, but anyway. And I think there was a play called that too or something. But so when we engage though, when we getting involved, what does that entail? We know we have to stand, but it's one thing to stand, it's another thing to push back. It's another thing to move forward. So how do we take the things you've just said and put them into action and say, okay, we know we should forgive. And listen, even though I dislike the governor, and I've made that very clear, I don't harbor anything against her, because the Bible says if I don't forgive, then I won't be forgiven, like you said. So what steps should we take to get involved, to actually say, how do we engage with our Christianity?
This is so important, and something that has given me hope and promise and optimism. And I just want to encourage so many of you out there and commend you, is how parents have started to take their children's education more seriously. It's one of the most positive and exciting developments happening right now in America. And by the way, the homeschooling population has doubled in America in the last year and a half. It has doubled. Now, I know homeschooling can be very daunting and intimidating. We'll talk about that. So let's just start with that. If you are a parent, you say, Charlie, how do I save the country? What do I do? First, take your child's education more seriously than you are already. Now, maybe you're 10 out of 10. Or maybe I might be stirring your heart a little bit. You're like, man, I have just kind of been dropping my kid off and not asking the tough questions about the textbooks. Maybe I'm not asking the questions about what they're learning in school. Maybe, and this is tough, right? Because you want to trust your local school. But I think after what we've seen the last 2 years, we have seen an agenda being implemented from the top levels to try and prey on children, indoctrinate them with beliefs that are not true, and also have them believe things that are going to bring them on a path that is completely unbiblical and against really where God's plan and purpose is for them. So let's just start with that. Let's start with parents all of a sudden reasserting their role as saying, I am not going to tolerate my child to be exposed to things that are blatantly untrue, that are filled with unclean spirits, and that are going to make them less happy and less likely to be able to succeed. So let's just, and Steve, I know you told a lot of parents to bring their kids and teenagers. I'm so glad for that. And I'm going to kind of take a little bit of a detour and head back to this. Parents, you need to hear this. And for teenagers and kids out there, you're going to hear something, and this does not mean it's an excuse. I have to preface this, okay? It's not an excuse to get free stuff or to play the victim. Okay, parents, I'm not blaming you. Let me be very clear. But this is the most medicated, suicidal, sickest, damaged, and interfered with generation as far as development in the history of our country. It's a serious problem. In fact, it's such a big problem, it would demand, under normal circumstances, like a Marshall Plan type intervention. You know, instead of worrying about systemic racism, maybe we should worry about the 107,000 fentanyl overdoses that happened in our country the last year, right? It is a generation that is the most likely to be experiencing daily feelings of anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation. It's the least godly generation, the most screen-addicted generation, the most violent generation. I could go through all of it. 40% of the younger generation identifies as LGBTQ. I don't know what all those letters stand for either. I did a whole radio show on this the other day. I got in a lot of trouble. I don't mean to insult anyone. I really don't. But when I grew up, when I said queer, it was an insult. Now it's, I guess, part of the alphabet mafia. Anyway, so that's a whole separate conversation for a different time. And I don't mean that, but it's just true. It's just the way that it's developing. And so for parents out there, we need to kind of just press pause, take a time out, and say, wait a second, what's going on with our children? So I think there's a couple factors. Number one, I think we have to be precise with our language when we kind of talk about this. People say, well, Charlie, it's because of the pandemic that all these kids are damaged. Now, I know what they're trying to say, okay? But what they're actually saying is totally untrue. And here's the proper response. No, it's not because of the pandemic. It's because of our reaction to the pandemic, okay? Those are two totally different things. We made a choice as a society, many of you did not, this church did not, where we are going to sacrifice the young to try and save the old. That sounds blunt, it might sound unfair, but it's true. It's the first civilization in history to say we're going to sacrifice the people that have more years to try to save the people that have less years. It's unbiblical, by the way. Now you might say, Charlie, that's an overstatement. Well, let's think about some of the public policy decisions that were made. Closed schools, virtual school, online learning, mask mandates, boosters for 3-year-olds. None of these things, through any scientific consensus, has any sort of epidemiological reason to actually save young people's lives. The only reason they ended up giving was what? No, they could end up spreading it to older people. Oh, so you're going to prevent their life to try to save other people's lives. It could be admirable for maybe 2 weeks or 4 weeks, but at some point you kind of all of a sudden get what? You get out of balance, right? Where all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, so now we're really hurting a generation. Most suicides ever, most self-harm incidents ever, most drug addicted, most alcoholic. I could go on, all of it. For what exactly? And other states that are completely and wide open, it shows that you don't even need to do that in the first place if you look at Texas or Florida and other states, right? And so one of the points with this is that if you're a parent out there, and not to mention the nonstop propaganda campaign on television. I mean, if you go to a public school or you just watch the nightly news, you hear the world is going to end in a variety of different ways, right? It's going to end from climate change. It's going to end from systemic racism. It's going to end from a virus you can't see. It's super depressing to watch the news nowadays. I mean, we were watching football backstage. I know we're not supposed to watch football because they're all woke. I get it, whatever. And so, but like every third commercial, you guys have seen this commercial. It's like people are dying, get the vaccine right now. I'm like, oh my goodness, that's really depressing. I mean, you know what I mean? Like we had to mute the television. And I guess they would say, well, it's effective. It's going to get people vaccinated. I said, yeah, or it just makes people give up on life because they're trying to watch a football game to get a release, and it's just this like morbid, nonstop propaganda campaign of someone who can't breathe in the hospital, right? I mean, we should also have a commercial saying you shouldn't drive at all because there's 55,000 people that die in auto fatalities every single year, right? We just have to stop the spread of auto fatalities. How dare we keep on driving? Who do we think we are, right? And so what I'm getting at here, though, is parents, you know this already, be on your guard, and grandparents in particular. Make sure you are watching your children and educating your children and leading them forth, right? Trying to limit their screen time. I think these devices need to be get rid of altogether. That's a separate conversation for a separate time. I think they do such damage. But this generation is on pace for some very serious long-term damaging problems, of which if we do not intervene quickly, all of a sudden 10 years from now, we're going to look at this, we're going to say, well, where did the atom bomb go off, basically, right? And we'll be able to point back to this. Now, for the young people out there, everything I just said, do not take that as an excuse to go do drugs, not go get the job that you might think you need, not work. By the way, we have this interesting dilemma, and I'm guessing you have this in Albuquerque as well, which is wages are higher than ever and no one wants to work. Do you have this problem in Albuquerque? Yeah, it's everywhere, by the way, and so no one really knows how to explain it. I have my own personal theories. Don't have to think that deeply about it, just people don't want to work, and it's not that hard to kind of figure out. But if you're younger and you're like, man, I came here for some hope, here's the good news, is that you can make a decision today to pursue liberty and not bondage. You can make a decision today to pursue a life of virtue and not one of vice. You can make a decision today to go for liberty and not licentiousness. You can make a decision right now. You have in your own ability right now to go one way or the other. And you might say, well, Charlie, what does that look like? Stop doing things that are bad for you, that you know are bad for you, that make you feel good immediately. Whatever those things might be. And I don't have to go too deep into that. It might be a drinking problem, a gossip problem, by the way. That's a sin of the flesh. Gossip makes you feel good. It's also one of the worst sins that you could do interrelationally. And so if you're a young person out there like, man, I have dark thoughts, it's so terrible out there, here's the amazing thing, is that Jesus wants you to be free from Satan's control over you. Liberty is not man's idea, it is God's idea. And the last 2 years, we've been told, stay locked down, stay masked, always be fearful. That is not Christ's plan for you at all. Christ wants you to flourish. He wants you to grow. He wants you to take risks. He wants you to go in pursuit and desire Him and desire God. He does not want you to be addicted to certain websites, or He doesn't want you to be getting drunk every single night, feel really low of yourself, or talking bad about other people. There is a better plan in front of you today. And I know that there's a society that doesn't want you to believe that, or a culture that tries to bring you down, but your best days are in front of you. And regardless of all this that's happening around you, and you can make that decision tonight.
So let me follow up that. So the narrative we hear all the time is gloom and doom.
All the time.
All the time. So we hear that constantly. We're being inundated with it. I mean, I personally quit watching the news. It just gets too much, and we don't watch commercials because I can't stand them. You know, everybody telling me I did this for my mom and dad, and it's just so divisive, like you said. So as believers, or not as believers, just citizens, as you talked about, because you can be a citizen of this country and not be a Christian. So as a citizen, we don't listen to this stuff. What is the next step? What is the involvement?
You're right. I took the detour and I didn't complete the point fully. Okay, so here's something that's really simple, and every single one of you can do it starting right after this, which is don't allow people to lie to you. I want you to think, don't lie yourself, that's a good one, and then don't allow people to lie to you. Now you might say, well, what's the significance of that? Which is that tyranny hates the truth. I'm going to say that again. Tyranny hates the truth. So if someone says, you know, it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated, you're like, hey, listen, pal, okay? Like, let's look at actually what's happening. That 3 times boosted people wearing masks all day long are still getting the virus and still having a tough time with it. That's not true. Now, why is that important? All of a sudden, Satan, the author of lies, he does not want to be confronted. Now, this might take you at times. You might have to get uncomfortable, right? You might have to be willing to confront people. But tyrannies are always built on lies, always. And if you look at the great devastation of the 20th century, what happened in China, what happened in Joseph Stalin's Russia, what happened in the National Socialist Workers' Party in Germany, it started with a small lie that then became big lies and became bigger lies. And you have an opportunity, every single one of you as a citizen, to do something about it. Now you might say, that's not for me, I have no interest in that, like whatever. Well, eventually those lies that you don't confront and that you don't try and stop will end up governing your entire society. It just will. It's the small ones that really matter. And so that's a really important thing. The second thing is this, which is we need to stop thinking so national. We need to stop thinking about Congress and the presidency. You understand a lot of that is a news corporate sponsor manipulation tactic to have you just go look at Nancy Pelosi all day long, who might get your heart rate going up, understandably. Meanwhile, there's a robbery and treachery happening in your local neighborhood. And so this is a really important point, which is that some people are much more comfortable kind of just doing the national thing while their local neighborhood deteriorates. What do? You start thinking more local. Now this is hard because it's going to require you to get into the car and go somewhere. It's going to require you to show up at meetings. But I can tell you right now that at the school board level here in New Mexico or the city council level, there's movements of citizens unlike anything I have seen recently, and it's happening all across the country. And it might be as easy as running for office or challenging someone that's already in office or filing a FOIA request or doing any one of these sorts of things. Or at the very, very basic level, you're like, none of that stuff's for me, but I'm going to help the people that are doing that. I'm going to find the candidates running for office that I like. I'm going to find the people that are outspoken. Or I like Steve because he speaks out so much. I'm going to ask Steve every week. I'm going to come up to him, Steve, how can I pray for you? Can I feed you? Can I get your family some food? What can I do for you? What am I getting at? Not just the fighters, we need people to help the fighters as well. Because maybe you've been gifted with something that's like, hey, you know, I run a taxi company here in Albuquerque and I don't know how I can get involved in the fight. Well, maybe you can help, you know, people get to school boards there and back that might not have transportation. What I'm saying is there are multiple ways to get involved in the fight. And, you know, I see this happening more and more where people that own all sorts of different types of businesses that might not feel as if, Charlie, I don't even know what I can do. I'm going to contribute my own personal service to whatever that might be. And the final thing is this, of what you can do. And I'm starting to see a revival and a resurgence in this that is so exciting, everybody, which is learn. Dedicate time every single day to learn about your nation, learn about your history, to learn about what's happening around you. You might say, well, Charlie, I don't know how to defeat the lies. Then spend time equipping yourself so you know how to do that. Understand the history of America, which, by the way, what a gift from the Lord that we live in this country, by the way. The greatest country ever to exist in the history of the world. And if you hear that and you're like, yeah, but then you're like, I don't know why. Well, there's a wealth of information and resources that you could pour into to know that, right? To know the road ahead, ask those coming back. And the Bible commands us to care for the welfare of the nation that we are in, to know about the nation that we are in, to know about our Constitution, to know about our constitutional rights and a republic. So if you say, Charlie, what does a citizen look like? There's a lot of citizens here tonight, and you're going to probably hear some questions from them. Citizens are disagreeable with bullies. They don't tolerate it. A citizen is like, no, I don't like that. I'm going to show up at 6 a.m. to make sure at the meeting you're going to have to see my face. Citizens communicate. So if you're writing down a list like what is a citizen, this is what it would be. Disagreeable with bullies. Citizens communicate. They're the ones that write the letters, write the emails, make the phone calls, right? So you might say, Charlie, how do I make a difference in like this one Washington, like this person going to DC or like, you know that like 4 or 5 phone calls at times to a state representative's office is enough just to kind of shake the trees of citizen engagement. 4 or 5 calls. What if all of a sudden there was a ministry started out of this church that's like, you know what? Every single week, we're just going to make calls to elected officials in New Mexico with these 5 policies that we disagree with. That's just a simple step, right? Communication. The third thing is that citizens are relentless in the pursuit of truth. They're always trying to uncover what's happening, right? They're trying to find out FOIA requests. They're trying to look at budgets and what's happening in local governments. Here's something, just kind of some advice. If you think you've uncovered all the treachery and corruption in New Mexico, you're wrong. There are people that have taken money from the federal government. They've redirected resources. Uncover it. Those are things that can open up people's eyes. They're like, wait a second, that person's earning what salary and that person's doing that. Meanwhile, my kid can't even learn in the local school. And so these are characteristics of citizens. And then finally, the last thing that really makes good citizens, and it's something that we as Americans are best at, is that we have to be optimistic. I know this is hard, right? No one likes pessimistic activists. That's like Greta Thunberg, okay? God bless her. But like the world's gonna end. Like, okay, I got that part, okay? But instead we should always be like, you know what? No, we can bring liberty to people who need it. Our best days are ahead. Eventually we're gonna break the shackles free. Optimism carries everybody. And this is a hard thing. It's my advice for you. You know, Steve, you say that, that you have been Christ-like to the governor. I've made plenty of missteps. In the last 9 months, I'm first one to, I get a little excited about the current regime at times. I totally admit it. But I have to check myself and say, no one really wants to follow an angry general into war, right? You want someone who's optimistic, who is clear about what victory looks like, and you have to understand that if you are just like, everything's terrible, it's all awful, then all of a sudden the enemy has won. And because the victory has already ultimately been won by Jesus Christ. We must remember that. We must remind ourselves of that. And so those are some things of what it means to be a citizen. And if I were to add one more just for everyone out there, it's also just the spiritual component of praying and fasting. It's so incredibly important. But I know it might not feel like it, everybody, but I travel the country. There's something happening in this country. There's something happening worldwide that has never happened, that hasn't happened at least over 130, 140 years, where you're going to see a revival, you're going to see a resurgence, you are going to see people. It's not politics, by the way. It's about citizen or subjects. It's that simple.
So the Bible says, occupy till he comes.
Yes.
So you're saying we've got to occupy. We can't just give up because the media, the narrative is, it's doomed.
Well, yeah, totally. And look, some churches talk about eschatology. Steve, your sermon on the Antichrist, I talk about a lot. It's one of the great sermons, I think, given in America in the last 10 years. It really is special. It has millions of views on YouTube. Some of you remember it when he gave it. I think it has like 2 million views on YouTube now, about the spirit of the Antichrist. And talking about the end times, talking about Revelation, can sometimes have an unintended consequence, which is this. Satan will whisper in your ear, hey, since things are ending, don't do anything. Eschatology, the study of the end times, can sometimes become an excuse for you to do nothing when the world feels like it's falling apart. Jesus never commanded for us to do that. So, look, you might think Jesus is coming next Thursday, and you might be right, okay? And you might be like, hey, house is on fire, let's just get the kids out, right? Everything's burning, let's just kind of flee. Instead, you should be like, let's just put the fire out, right? Which is, Jesus said, the hour and the day is unknown. Now, we should look at the signs of the times, right? We should look at what the Bible says about those things, but never should we allow the study of end times or Christ's return be kind of a get-out-of-jail-free card, like, I don't have to show up at the school board meeting because they're teaching 6-year-olds they can become men, because Jesus, next Tuesday, I'm telling you, he's coming. Wrong. And I know that some people in this room, you might be like chuckling, but you're like, maybe I've felt that way at some point. Because sometimes you feel, hey, Charlie, it's not falling apart, it's falling into place. You might be right. But we're supposed to occupy till he comes. In fact, we're actually supposed to advance the gospel into new places, to be salt and light in places that we never thought possible before. And understand this, that the spiritual dimension of all this is so incredibly important, which is that Satan does not like being called out. He is a liar, he is filth, he is the prosecutor. And when we are advancing with light into new terrain and to new areas, that's all of a sudden what makes Satan nervous. Like, we want to make him go on a retreat. And this church has done such an amazing job with that. But look, no, it's not about running to the hills and waiting for the storm to go away. In fact, I think it's the exact 180 opposite. In a time right now where you have such incredible problems in our country, such moral chaos, this is a time where the church needs to double and triple down, where we need to have our offensive strategy against the darkness plaguing our land.
So that offensive strategy would be, and when you talk about being a good citizen, even as a believer, when Christians say things like, well, it's not my thing, I don't want to get involved, I don't want to vote, I don't want to register to vote, I don't want to, it's just not my thing, I don't want to hear it. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I could respond to it with patience or impatience, so I could give you both versions if you guys want. I'll try the patience one first, and then we could try the other one if you want, Steve. You might actually.
Absolutely, I do.
Yeah, exactly. I might start with that one. I say, knock it off. There's injustice happening around you. For example, let's take New Mexico, okay? I'm going to say this lovingly. If I offend you, sorry, okay, whatever. Charlie, I'm not into that sort of thing. Okay, you're the post-birth abortion capital of the country. And you don't think that's worth you as a Christian doing something about, commenting on, praying about, fasting about, electing people to try to fix it? Like, I don't do that. Well, then it's kind of the gospel in name only, okay? Then the gospel's been good for you, but don't go and give it to other people, right? As Christians, once you are saved, it's not like, I'm good and I'm not going to give it to anyone else. That's awfully selfish, isn't it? Where it's like, so you take New Mexico, and I'm not trying to play too much into this. There's spiritual darkness in this place. You guys know it. You could feel it when you land. It's a real thing, right? And partially because you guys allow, through your laws, not you, right, but your leaders, just the way it is the most, what's the right way to frame it, Steve? The worst abortion laws in the country. Is that fair to say?
Correct.
And, I mean, just as a Christian, you say, when does life begin? And why are we allowing that to happen? Now you might say, oh, Charlie, there's nothing we can do about that. Well then, I would encourage you to try to get your faith a little bit more strengthened, because through God, all things are possible. And so this is the impatient answer, by the way. But it's also, if not you, then who? If not you, then who is the one that's actually going to try to rid the world of the injustice, of the child sex trafficking happening on the border? If not you, who is going to be the one that tries to stop the chemical castration of 10-year-olds that are being told they're men when they're women or women when they're men? If not you, then who? If not you, then who is going to be the one that actually contests for liberty? And they're like, oh, that's somebody else's job. What I'm getting at is that if the church doesn't take the stand for righteousness, do you think all of a sudden the local 7-Eleven, they're going to be like, hey, we're now going to be the ones that... No, of course not. The church is all that stands between this tsunami of darkness taking over the country and not. And guess what? That means that you are going to be judged at a higher level than others, because you know the truth and the truth has set you free. And then you're like, am I willing to go wade into these more controversial, more kind of messy situations? Of course, doing it Christ-like, 100% grace, 100% truth. But it's also like, you know what? No, I'm not going to put up with this. I'm going to do everything I possibly can at my disposal, and then I'll leave the rest up to God, right? But churches that give that excuse, Steve, I think are in 3 different categories, okay? One category is they're scared. Now, I'm going to give a little bit of sympathy to them. It's easy to be afraid. But fear is not of the Lord. Okay, you should only have fear of the Lord. That's a separate topic for a different time. They're afraid that they're going to lose tithes and offerings. They're afraid they're going to lose membership. They're afraid that someone's going to say something bad about them. I will say to them, and it's kind of my thing, I'm trying to kind of just encourage them, it's okay to get in the fight, okay? We'll take a lot of those arrows for you. But also, kind of, if I could speak bluntly to you, really? You as a Christian are worried about persecution? What book are you reading exactly? Like, I mean, that's the whole program, my friend. Like, it's kind of the whole deal. Have you read Acts? It's like a Mediterranean, journey of persecution. It's like every country, every venue, every culture, they're coming to kill you. Okay, buckle up. We have the truth and you don't. We're going to spread it, right? In fact, here's the problem, is that we have it so good, thanks to Christians that came before us, we are able to be apathetic. So let's just look at Canada. They're arresting pastors still for having church. Don't ever tell me politics doesn't matter. In New Zealand, they just told a pregnant woman she was not allowed entry into the country because her vaccination status wasn't up to par, and instead she had to go seek help from the Taliban, pay them off with cash to try to have her children. That's New Zealand. How about Australia? You can't leave your home at 10 p.m. after 10 p.m. in Australia. That's just in the Western Anglosphere. People say, oh, politics doesn't matter. Well, in Australia, they have lots of big Christian churches that have always said, we don't care about politics. We're going to do the church thing, we're not going to do the politics thing, and then they shut down the church, they shut down everything else. And so this country was different, though. This country, thanks to the greatest political document ever written, the United States Constitution, with 7 promises, 7 statements put in the preamble of the Declaration, written by Christians for all people, but also in particular to churches in the pursuit of virtue, was very simple. Like, no, the church is off limits. Like, no, actually, we're allowed to speak and you work for us. Total paradigm shift. And for the church to all of a sudden receive this gift that was divinely inspired and say, yeah, I'm kind of like apathetic on that, that's not biblical. That's not Christ-like. In fact, that's basically saying, God, thanks for intervening before. I don't care about what you did in prior generations. You know, one of the first acts of Congress after the Continental Congress, they passed the Constitution, was paying for and minting Bibles for the citizens of the new colonies. You know that 55 out of 56 of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were Bible-believing, church-attending Christians? 55 out of 56. You know that in 10 out of 13 colonies, they didn't have state-endorsed religions, but they had clear beliefs in their Massachusetts State Constitution, Pennsylvania State Constitution, Maryland State Constitution of God granted God natural rights. So all of a sudden you have this civilization that's created by the church, by the way, saved by the church multiple times, and we don't really, in my personal opinion, give thanks to Billy Graham for what he did in the 1950s to keep America on spiritual course, truly. And he spoke against communism and socialism. And then you have a church that cares more about Instagram followers and YouTube live streamers than actually contesting for righteousness. So they're afraid. Okay, then there's the church that is complicit. Now, they're even worse, Steve. Now, this is the church where I take the gloves off and I say, all right. It's not that they're like, oh, I don't want to do anything. They do the opposite. They're the church with the gay flag out front. They're the church with the BLM flag. They're the church that's like, we're going to stay locked down for the next 10 years or whatever. And that all of a sudden is what we're warned against in 1 Peter as false prophets, of churches that are then doing the work of the other side, or churches that say, yeah, we don't really take stances on abortion here in this church. Or there's new churches that are like, we don't take stances on heaven or hell. Like, what do you take stances on exactly? It's like, are you even a church, or are you just kind of like a coffee shop at this point, right? With really good parking, by the way, really good parking. And this is an important component, right, Steve? Which is, I think I got you with that one, right?
Yeah, you did give me that. Yeah, that was good.
That this type of church, what you see around you, Legacy Church, is so rare and unique. There are other churches starting to rise up. But the last flame of liberty that we have in America will be protected and spread by Christians and the church. And it's a moral obligation for us to do so.
So we're getting close to where we'll take questions, but so I'm looking at some of these questions, and they're also good. So is it possible to save the country without losing something? Because that's what people are afraid to do. They're, well, if I take this down, I'll lose this something. I'll lose this job or that thing. Or, when we took a stand as a church, my wife and I got together and I said, you realize that we could lose everything here. Because we didn't know all the threats from the government. And I'll never forget, she looked at me, she goes, well, if that's what it takes. So how do we take these stands? I mean, will it cost us something?
Yes, and no one wants to hear that because we live in a super rich country where you get whatever you want, whenever you want. And no one wants the truth, but you guys do. Actually, I shouldn't say no one, but most of America doesn't want the truth. Most people are like, oh wait, so can I get the country back that I grew up in and also just kind of like Uber eat it, like just like kind of push a couple buttons and it kind of like arrives and like open up my door and like, it's the country again. Like, actually, no, it's gonna cost something. And it's going to cost everybody something different. This is an important thing. It's not an equal kind of promise here. For some of you, it's very little. For some of you, it's a ton. And some of you know that you're called for this. And some of you know that you're going to be called in this moment for this, right? And so for some people, it'll be reputational damage. It'll be career. It'll be family. It's all sorts of different things. But the country's not all of a sudden coming back with all of a sudden, without us kind of taking a stand, and we're saying, okay, you can fire me. I don't care. Or all of a sudden, you know what? Fine, you're not going to shop at my business anymore. I don't care. You see, the power that the enemy has over good people that want their country back is the fear of loss. Now, not all fear of loss is bad, by the way. If you're a parent, you should be afraid of losing your children. That's good fear of loss, by the way. God gave you that instinct for a reason. Right? You shouldn't want to lose your job, obviously. But you all know those situations, and God will give you wisdom abundantly, James 1:5. He'll give it to you generously. When all of a sudden, and some of you, I'm sure in this room right now, where all of a sudden you said, okay, you get the vaccine in 2 weeks or you lose your job. I'm sure there's people in this room that faced that. And I'm sure there's people on both sides of that felt, I'm not condemning you, by the way, if you decided to get the shot for that reason. I am not. Because I'm not in your shoes and I don't know the kind of pressures you might be under or the people you might be supporting. I've never done that, and I think people that do that, it's not right. I will say, though, that people that made that leap of faith to say, I will take an income hit because I don't want to do something that's against my religious beliefs, that's the type of act of courage that is all of a sudden going to make it harder for them to continue their takeover of the country, right? And I'll be honest that in the last 9 months, the people in charge are really confused. They're confused by you. And you could see it because they say it. They say it openly. They don't get why all of a sudden you are caring more than ever before. They don't get why you continue to show up to events like this. They don't get why you're pulling kids out of public schools. They thought all of a sudden that they could implement a regime and everyone was going to give up, and all of a sudden you call you bad names. You're like, okay, that's it. This country's done and over with. Just give me my free money. It's like, actually, no, we have a lot more fight left in us than they actually thought. And it's actually they, and I use they as an open term. Who is they, right? It could be Bezos. It could be Klaus Schwab, who runs the World Economic Forum. It could be George Soros, right? It could be Schumer. It could be Pelosi. It could be any one of them. You know what I mean by they. It's the globalists, the people that have the power right now. The people that run Facebook, the people that run Google, the people that run these mass media companies, the people that do all of this. All of a sudden, they are the ones that are now getting demoralized. Because they're like, man, there's 60, 70, 80, 90 million people that are kind of really upset with the way things are going, like who would have thought, and they're actually willing to do something about it. You see, the Great Reset, to tie this all together, Steve, the Great Reset ends the moment that we are willing to lose something to get our country back. And it's something for everybody to, and this is a super unpopular message, by the way, because you want to hear the message that's like, hey, just vote for these people, you could do it anonymously, and it's like, actually, no, it's going to be every decision that's going to matter. It's going to be the small things that are the big things.
So good.
And it's something that actually should give you peace, because for the first time, you're hearing something that you know is true, right? Not the platitude of a politician, right? Not the bumper sticker that's like, just one more election cycle, things will get better. Like, no, this is going to be a struggle. But you do have momentum, and you do have things on your side. And I'll tell you, Steve, I'm so encouraged because I see messages, and we get these emails on our podcast and our radio show of people that have sacrificed so much, and they are willing to pursue righteousness above comfort. And so if you kind of look at this, you look in the spiritual component of this, let's just kind of use an example in the church. What is fasting? Well, fasting is you denying your flesh for a spiritual breakthrough or for obedience to the Lord or desiring God. Fasting is the practice of not doing what you think you need in the moment for something you know that is actually greater for you. I'm a big fan of fasting. I love churches that fast. I think when individual citizens fast, you become a wiser, more honest, and courageous person. I think there's a massive, there's a huge part of wisdom of fasting I don't think the church always talks about. You think about it though, it's you making a decision that I'm not going to do what feels good in the moment because I want something on the back end. What is that? We call it delayed gratification, obviously, right? It's no different for the nation. That's when I say when we must fast and pray for the nation, I mean it literally and metaphorically. Meaning you might have to go through a period of metaphorical fasting in your life for the next 6 to 9 months or 2 years. You're like, yeah, I don't have the job I might not want. I don't have the friends I want. Let's talk about that part of it. Let's forget the job. I've been focusing on that. Let's talk about the friends. If you are unwilling to say something because you're afraid that someone close to you might think of you differently, then they control you. And by the way, they're not your friend either, okay? Let's just be honest. And that doesn't mean you should seek the severance of friendships. Never. But if all of a sudden, if I do a show of hands, how many people have lost friends because of these topics in the last couple? Every hand goes up. I've lost whole communities of them, right? Don't seek that. Don't seek that division, right? But instead, all of a sudden, there's kind of this feeling that I think you can agree with that's kind of liberating, isn't there? Where you're like, you know what? I mourn the loss of that friendship, but I know what I believe, and I know why I believe it, and I'm not going to allow them to control what I say and what I speak. And that's the final thing I'll say here, Steve, which is really important, which is, who are we as human beings? We're made in the image of God. And so in the Bible, there are 2 creation stories, and they both say the exact same thing, because they're the same creation story. It's Genesis 1 and John 1. So in Genesis 1, it says God spoke things into existence. In John 1, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. That word is the word logos in Greek, which means rational speech or logic. So all of a sudden you have in Genesis 1 and John 1, this amazing parallel that the existence of who we are, everything around us, comes from speech. It's our ability to organize the natural world. We are the only animals in the animal kingdom ladder that can speak. I'm not saying communicate. Dogs can communicate. I have a really smart, awesome dog, by the way. Don't mess with him. He's really tough. Briggs Dutch Shepherd, right? He can communicate pleasure from pain. He can communicate when he's hungry or when he's annoyed, but he can't communicate just from unjust or right from wrong. That is work that is left exclusively to us as human beings. So it says in the Bible that we are made in the image of God. As image bearers, we are able to speak. Well, this is a really interesting thing. When we stop talking to one another, all of a sudden we start, by definition, stop being fully human. And when you think about what's happened in the last couple of years, mandating masks on children, trying to make people foreign and distant one another, making people unfamiliar. We stop talking. By definition, we stop being exactly who God made us, as we are in the image of God. In the beginning was the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And so when we look, Charlie, how do you save the country? How do we get people back to righteousness? We need to reassert ourselves to exactly how God equipped us to be able to communicate and bring him towards truth. And that means you must become communicators. You must know what you're talking about. You must have the courage to talk about those things, and then you must talk about them. Speech, that means disagreeable speech. That means to people that need to hear it. That means maybe you need to go correct someone in your life that might be a little astray on these sorts of issues. But it's not going to happen automatically by sitting down and remaining quiet. And that comes down to that expression, right? Well, Charlie, it's a silent majority. And guess what? A silent majority is not going to save this country. It's not. It's going to have to be a vocal majority, a Christ-filled majority, a liberty-loving majority. And with that, that's how we're going to save the country.
Yes, how good is that? You want to take a few questions? Let's do this. He's agreed to take questions for the next 10 or 15 minutes. Pastor Brian's going to come over here.
Can I also say something really quick, Steve? I'm going to be visiting New Mexico 3 more times, this church right here, and I'm going to tell you why. Couple things. I love Steve, number one, that's honestly, because he has such courage, and I love this whole church team here. But also, I have a heart for New Mexico. I think you have been abused and wildly misrepresented in a variety of different ways. And it's a short flight from Phoenix, which is where I live. And I just have a heart to try to pour into you guys, to encourage you guys. And so as we announce the next three kind of stops that I'm coming here, bring a friend, bring someone that might be interested, someone that might want to hear this. I really want to see these things grow in interest and engagement and curiosity. And what better place and venue to be able to do that than this church?
Yeah, thank you for doing that too. Listen, if you have a question, if you just come to the middle aisle, come to where this gentleman, Brian, hold up your hand with a microphone, and he
Question,
will.
not a speech.
A question. We don't want a narrative. We don't want you to tell him your whole life. If you have a question, and seriously, guys, I'm not trying to be mean, because I know how this is why we don't do testimonials in churches anymore, because they don't give a testimony. They just want to preach to everybody and tell them what they should do. So if you have a good question, ask it, and I'm going to intervene if it's just you want a speech. So go ahead.
All right, I think I know. You know where I stand.
It says arrest Fauci and Gates, is what it says.
So you mentioned a lot of groups like the World Economic Forum and all these other groups that are important and influential in the world. Who do you think is the most influential in driving American policy and world policy?
That's a super smart question. It's unclear. I think Klaus Schwab is definitely up there. If I had to pinpoint one person that you're not supposed to talk about, it's George Soros. George Soros has decided to use his money, $20 billion he's dedicated to destroying the country, electing DAs. Did he get in the DA's race here? I bet he did. I'm sure he did, yeah. I didn't want to speak out of turn or else his team would sue me. That's how they work. They're vicious. So thank you for giving me that information. Soros is definitely up there. I think that the Silicon Valley companies are definitely up there as well. Google, Facebook, Amazon. But I think it's a group more than a singular individual, to be perfectly honest. But we must understand that their agenda is to try to create a technocratic, highly technological, medical, that's an interesting new development, isn't it? Tyranny, where we live in fear and we're always under their control. And here's the thing that we as Christians, this shouldn't confuse you, everybody. It shouldn't. Because if you know spiritual dynamics, people wanting to control people, that shouldn't confuse you. When I talk to secular audiences, I can understand why that might be confusing. They're like, Charlie, what do they want? I don't get it. It seems as if all they want to do is control people. Well, yeah, that's what the enemy wants to do. He wants to keep you in a place of fear and intimidation. And so Bill Gates and Anthony Fauci are definitely up there. Is that a homemade shirt? I got to tell you. That's... Yeah, okay. Yeah.
InfoWars.
Yeah. But I do appreciate the sentiment of it. And but I just want to make one thing about Fauci really quick on this, which is that you know, Fauci should be in prison, all this sort of stuff. I could go through that at great length. But let me tell you why. Let me tell you why Fauci is so dangerous. It's that he breaks multiple promises of the Constitution. So the Constitution has a couple promises that aren't explicitly written, but they're really talked about a lot in the Federalist Papers. So let's talk about one: consent to the governed. No one ever voted for Anthony Fauci, right? Even worse, there's no way to really get rid of him. Think about that. It's like he has all this power in an unelected bureaucracy, right? Number two, independent judiciary. That's a characteristic of the American constitutional order, right? Which has always worked. There's really not a judge that has put him in his place either, nor is there a way to do that. Number three, checks and balances. What is the check and balance against Anthony Fauci? He comes to Capitol Hill and Rand Paul asks some questions, who's done a great job, by the way. I think Rand Paul's been one of the great ones. He really has. And Ron Johnson as well, who's been really good. But you get what I'm getting at there, right? Where it's like he's kind of immune. And, you know, we make jokes, he's like Czar and Lord Fauci. But if we look at the Constitution, it has these promises of checks and balances. And then finally, this is the most important promise that Fauci breaks, is separation of powers. So why did the Founding Fathers put separation of powers in the Constitution? Because they thought people were so evil and awful, which we believe as Christians, because of original sin, that no one person should be able to make policy. Anthony Fauci had more power than almost any other elected president in the history of the country. I know that's a hard thing to comprehend, but one human being basically shut down the schools, changed transit as we know it, and had multiple trillions of dollars directed where it shouldn't go. That's the stuff of like 6th century kings in, you know, feudal societies. And so you say, well, Charlie, how do we prevent that? Instead of the Great Reset, we need a constitutional reset, because the Constitution actually has solutions to every single one of these things. Thank you so much for being here.
That was a great question. Next one, Brian.
This one comes from our Clovis Portalis campus, and it says this: Charlie, do you feel that cryptocurrency is part of the Great Reset?
That's a great question. So I actually call it crypto assets, not cryptocurrency, because the Treasury Department is very clear they're not going to allow it to be a currency. It's going to be more like a stock than it is a currency. So you might think that's a word game. No, it's really important because they're not going to allow a serious challenge to the dollar. In fact, they're going to be creating a digital dollar very soon. I don't think it's part of the Great Reset. I actually think blockchain technology is a threat to the Great Reset. I think that properly understood and properly deployed, I think blockchain technology can be really helpful. I don't need to get into it. In fact, I don't even understand it. I think these two gentlemen here, based on the enthusiasm and their applause, probably understand it better than I do. I understand like 1% of it, but crypto as we know it can be very confusing and intimidating to a lot of you. You might think it's a scam. And some crypto assets might be a scam, but the technology behind it is not. It's legit, because here's why. It's transparent. You can see who's transacting what at what times. It's finite. You know how much of it has actually been created. We actually don't even know how many dollar bills are out there right now. We do know how many Bitcoin are out there. And also, it's democratized. The entry it's a low barrier to entry. So the thought process behind blockchain is actually really awesome. I think it could help fix our voting systems. I think it actually fix our medical system. And so I encourage people to look deeper into it. Now, could it be abused? Yes. Could it be taken advantage of? Of course. But actually, in its current capacity, if it's at its current trajectory, I could say, blockchain could be a technological counterbalance to a lot of the tyranny that we have been seeing. Now, that's not to say you should all go buy Bitcoin and Ethereum right now. I am not saying that. But the underlying technology behind it actually gives a tremendous amount of hope to actually restore individual sovereignty and people's rights up against the regime.
Good.
So, thank you.
Good. Next question.
Hi, I like how you keep using regime and whatnot. I think it's great. So you say you made a couple of good points. You know, you brought up the
Only
serfs.
a couple?
No, like everyone actually.
I'm kidding.
So like, I suspect our interpretations are pretty synonymous. So you bring up the serf and the citizen. You bring up the WEF, which, you know, I think is pretty much another form of the NEP, the new economic policy that Lenin had brought in. And so that was their most actual successful period. It was like a blending or a mixture of socialist and capitalist policy. And so also, you also brought up like the vaccine and the mandate, which is kind of like the dissolution
Do you have a
of
question,
love.
though?
Yeah, so all of
Okay,
these,
if
all
you
of
just
these
get your
points-
question, because there's a lot of people behind you, I appreciate it, dude.
Okay,
Thanks.
so like vaccine, dissolution of love, it's kind of cynical. So since you bring up the WEF and, these mandates, are you basically saying it's America's time for its Antichrist and like soon?
I mean, that's more for Steve to answer than I would. I would think his sermon speaks for it a lot. And just so everyone know, the WEF is the World Economic Forum. But if I will say this, I think that what we're seeing with the consolidation of global power is explicitly prophesized in the New Testament. And it's hard to, and in fact, even some of the kind of trends we see with the borderless society and all that, and Steve, you would be able to go at greater length at that than I would.
What did you want me to say?
Well, do you think the Antichrist is coming, Steve?
Well, when it comes to that, the Antichrist is coming. We just don't know when. And so,
At these events, you're basically saying that they are like here pretty soon. At these events of the
well, no, I don't think we're saying. I think what we're saying is, regardless of the events or the eschatology, the end times, we still have to be believers and keep fighting. We still have to keep going forward. So,
Amen.
And I think that's what we're saying. I think that's what Charlie is so great at articulating, that, that's why we don't look to that. I mean, the Bible's very clear. We don't know when Jesus is coming back. We don't know when the Antichrist will be manifested. But here's what, and so I don't want to get into, the pre, post, mid, because then that's another whole debate. So anyway, thank you for your question, man. Let's go on.
Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Kirk, sir. My name is Ken Trenier. As a first-generation Chinese American, would me challenging critical race theories against my professor count as communication? Because my parents came here as immigrants, they never victimized themselves, and yes, they make six figures over the years, because that's the American dream, baby!
That was awesome, man.
So let me ask you, do you go to school locally here?
Yes, sir, I'm a college student at UNM.
And they're teaching critical race theory and all that?
Sadly, yeah.
And so it's just basically white supremacy is the law of the land and all that. So I'm curious, technically you're a minority in this country and they tell you you're oppressed. How do you, and you tell them actually, no, I'm not.
Yes, sir, and all the white liberal chicks and guys get all mad at me.
I love that. Oh my God.
I can't do any better than that. And I'm so glad you're in America, man. We need more people like you. God bless you.
That was awesome. That was awesome, dude. That was great. That was absolutely incredible. You're my hero today, buddy. I always have one of the day. You're it. There you go.
Kind of along those same lines, this is another Clovis Portalis question. As a student being taught some CRT aspects, how do I protest the indoctrination without letting my grades drop?
Yeah, okay, you can't. It's either you'll protest it or your grades will drop, and if your grades don't drop, you're in the exception, not the rule. This goes back to what I said earlier, right? You're not going to be able to pursue righteousness and to pursue truth and also have things the way you want to have them. As things currently stand, absent you're homeschooled or you go to a really nice private school or you get lucky with a tolerant public school teacher, which is the minority. Look, CRT is racism. It's that simple. And it's not reverse racism, it's just plain racism. It's viewing people through a racial tribalistic lens. Now, so if you look at what the Bible promises, it says neither slave nor Greek nor Jew, we are all one in Christ Jesus. It says in 1 Samuel that God does not look at the exterior, he looks at the heart. This idea that we should focus on superficial differences is at direct odds with the promises of the Bible and the unifying doctrine of Jesus Christ. So to this person's question, how do you effectively combat CRT? I could give you a lot of literature if you're interested. There's a new book from James Lindsay called Race Marxism out. It's really good. There's a lot of good books written about this, but you don't have to think too deeply about this to refute it. It's really very simple. If you think skin color matters, you're a racist. If you don't think skin color matters, you're on the right trajectory, you're on the right path. We think that character, we think that content of somebody, and we think the soul and the spirit of somebody matters. We do not think that superficiality matters. Now, that gets them all in kind of a tailspin, because like, I don't know, in order to be anti-racist, we must now be racist. That's like the new kind of mantra. It's not popular. First of all, people are rejecting it, but it is imperative that every young person out there values truth above grades. Let me ask you a question. Do you think someone in the 1950s South arguing with a teacher about Jim Crow and segregated bathrooms, do you think that kid was doing the right thing? Of course, right? We'd make movies about that kid, right? It's the same thing today. People say, oh, Charlie, that's an overreaction. Okay. At Centennial Public Schools in Denver, they have playground hours where white families are not allowed to attend. In public schools in Atlanta, they put black kids in one classroom and white kids in another classroom. At Western Washington University, they have black-only dormitories. They have black-only graduation ceremonies at Columbia University where white families and white students are not allowed to attend. That sure sounds like the antebellum South, doesn't it? And so every parent, and again, you can parent the way you want to, but if you look back at the 1960s, like, oh yeah, it's a no-brainer. Of course, you challenge your teachers in the antebellum South. Who cares? You graded differently. But now today, it's like, oh, well, you got to go to college. You got to get good grades. I think that stuff does not matter nearly as much, even like remotely as much, as being a courageous and Christ-filled person. Do not put up with this nonsense.
How many more questions?
One or two.
Okay.
Hi, so I recently decided to go back to school after 8 years to obtain a career in alcohol and drug recovery, since it is a big issue here and I also had similar issues. With the grace of God, His word in this church, I was able to seek my sobriety. But now that I am in college courses, thank you. Now that I'm taking college courses, I'm really being fed a lot of CRT, and they basically blame all these issues on racial oppression. Since my goal is to reach people with the Word of God and to impact their lives with the Word of God, how do you suggest I do this with the college system that removes God's glory and basically makes us a victim to anti-American society?
Well, first of all, I just want to encourage you. Congratulations on your sobriety. That's a big deal. And I use the example of alcoholism to young people a lot because young people say, Charlie, liberty is being able to do whatever I want to do whenever I want to do it. I say, go meet an alcoholic and tell me if they're free or not. They become free when they stop doing what they want to do when they want to do it, right? It's a message we must communicate to our children. Let me just make one side comment, just to kind of debunk your professors. If they think that alcohol and drug addiction is solely something that impacts Native American or Hispanic communities, I encourage them to get in the car and drive through Kansas or Oklahoma, Missouri, Iowa. It impacts every community. In fact, there are some statistics that the opioid epidemic disproportionately hurts white working class communities only because of manual labor that happens in the Northeast, especially lobstermen, all these sorts of different positions that they get back injuries and it really impacts them. So it's racist to imply otherwise. The drug epidemic, fentanyl, it impacts all communities, right? It is colorblind through and through. But how do you fight back against it? This is going to be a real challenging of your faith and a challenging of your walk. You will become stronger if you remain close to God's word and God's promises throughout this. But this is important because you're going to be in classes where they're spewing all this nonsense, right? And you'll have to make a decision. Like, do I contest for what I know to be true? Or do I kind of just say nothing? Maybe saying nothing's the right choice. Because maybe you're like, I got to get good grades because I want to go get a job, and maybe you'll be able to minister there. But I think that if you pray deeply about it, God will open up an opportunity for a topic that you know really well, for something that they're saying that's untrue, for you to have that perfect time to insert yourself with truth. And you might say, Charlie, how do I do that? The best way to communicate in hostile environments is to ask questions. Don't tell people things, ask questions. So you as a student can say, hey, why is it that the opioid epidemic is also in a lot of white-dominant states as well? Like the whitest state in the country, Vermont, or New Hampshire and Montana, they all have huge opioid problems too. Why is that the case if it's all about structural racism? That's a good question they won't know how to answer, right? And so, look, I deal in hostile environments all the time. I visit college campuses, so you don't have to. Asking questions. And by the way, you might say, Charlie, where'd you get that from? Jesus. When Jesus went in to go talk to the Sadducees and the Pharisees, it was always the dialectic of questioning. It's asking questions. And so I just want to encourage you. You're going to have some difficult moments there, but your spiritual muscles will grow stronger the more that you push back against all that darkness and that nonsense.
So one more? Okay, one more. I'm sorry.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah,
that?
you just say.
So I'm going to just make a shameless plug. I do this every time I'm here, everybody. So we're under huge censorship of our podcast because we have made some stances of just saying that people shouldn't be forced to take the vaccine. We dare to actually talk about how ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, and earlier intervention could have saved some lives. And because of that, our podcast is getting very much censored. It would mean a lot to us if you guys would consider just taking out your phone and subscribing to our podcast. Every Apple iPhone has a podcast app. I know some of you have already done this. I want to thank you for that. You just type in Charlie Kirk Show. You hit subscribe. It's a plus sign in the upper right-hand corner. It helps our show remain to grow. Despite their threats of cancellation, we reached 11 million downloads in the month of January, which is a record number for us. And we are the top Bible-based Christian worldview daily podcast. We do 3 podcasts a day. So all you got to do is take out your phone, you type in Charlie Kirk Show. It really does bless us. I know you say, I've already done it. Charlie, what does it mean? It's how we keep our entire movement going. So please consider doing that. Okay, last question.
Hi, Charlie. I love your podcast, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I didn't coordinate that, so thank you.
My name is Patrick. I'm 22. I'm very passionate about getting into activism, and you're a shining light in that. And I would just, and you talked a lot about, you had various tips and throughout this whole night. But I would just ask, what is your maybe top 2, top 3, just number 1, something that you would tell young activists starting out, something that you wish you knew earlier? And I personally believe New Mexico can be a red state again. It's happened in the past, and we've just got to spread kindness, thank a police officer, get out there and
Amen. So, just to answer your question, I'm gonna repeat something I said earlier. I wish I would have taken this more seriously when I was 18, 19, 20, 21. I was a little bit busy building an organization from nothing and trying to scrap together the money to do that. So I was a little busy, but I wish I would have taken more time every single day to turn my phone off and learn new things. I do it now. I do 2 hours of learning every single day about American history, world history, philosophy, all that. I don't expect you guys to be able to do 2 hours a day. But here's one piece of advice for all people. Do a little bit of an audit of what you consume, because you become what you consume. What do you listen to when you drive? What do you listen to when you work out? And what do you listen to when you unwind? Those are the 3 things. What are you watching when you do those? What are you watching or hearing or listening? Now, if it's the radio and it's sinful music, then you might be more prone to sinful behavior at work or at home. Now, if it's gospel and praise music, you might be more prone to those things. The Bible tells us in so many words that we become what we consume, right? So be very careful what you consume. And maybe it's like, hey, I'm going to just try to listen to an audiobook about American history. Or maybe I'm just going to sit in silence in the car and pray to God, which actually I kind of like to do sometimes. It's really comforting and really nice. So let me just kind of that's one thing. The second thing of advice to a young activist is don't be afraid to work. Which is, there's this kind of tendency, it's like, I'm a young activist, I want to save the country. Hey, we need door knockers. We need people that are willing to make phone calls. Before I did anything in the political space, I knocked on over 100,000 doors between the ages 14 and 18 for local candidates in Illinois. You want to learn a lot about politics? You want to learn a lot about yourself? Go knock on doors in Chicago trying to get Republicans elected. You'll learn a lot. Hey, Mr. Smith, do you want to go vote for? Yeah, you'll learn a lot about that. So for young activists, stay engaged and stay involved in that. And then finally, it's to reject anyone trying to play the victim around you or you be the victim. Look, I get it. Inflation is soaring. It's hard to find meaningful work. You got to wear a mask at work half the time. Property values are going up. It can feel as if, as a younger person, the American dream is getting out of grasp. But it's still very much attainable for all of you through hard work and dedication and through grit.
Grit, there you go.
Right? you can make it happen. Thank you so much. God bless you. So
Charlie, let's wrap this up. I know it's getting late and you got a flight.
there's only one more thing I have to share with all of you that's really important, which is that Jesus did not come to make wrong people good. He came to make dead people alive. And if you have not given your life to Jesus Christ, then you are spiritually dead inside. And the gospel in 4 words is Jesus took my place, 3 words, him for me, 2 words, substitutionary atonement, 1 word, grace. You can't earn it. You can't check boxes to get there. You can't go do a bunch of good stuff to get to heaven. You have to accept this free gift given to you by Christ Jesus himself from our God to us. And Steve, my wish for everyone in this audience right here is that we'll see each other in heaven, because that's truly what we're fighting for every single day.
Yes. You know, before we close, let me say this. Let's just take a moment, if we would, and if you would, and you've heard a lot of stuff today. You've heard about our Constitution, you've heard about our Bible, you've heard about what it is to be a citizen. And to me, I sit here and I learn so much. I know what I know, and I'm not sure what I don't know, right? And so when I listen to Charlie talk, I'm so amazed how he articulates the gospel that I believe in a way that makes sense in the time I'm living in. And I'm so thankful for that. I'm thankful for you. I just think God has raised you up. I think you're our voice to help us. God couldn't raise up a pastor, but he could raise up a believer who has no fear. And the reason I believe that is because he truly believes in Jesus. And without Jesus, you're lost. Without Jesus, your destination is hell. And so if you're here, just for a moment, if you would, with every head bowed, just for a second of reverence. If you say, hey, listen, I came here tonight, I didn't know what to expect. I just know Charlie, I've listened to him, I've watched him. I want to make a difference in the state and our community. And if you could say that, you know what, but I'm not sure I know Jesus. Or maybe you're here and you said, I've known him, but I've walked away. I'm ready to get engaged, because you've listened to so many different maybe preachers or Christians talk and tell you you're wrong about the way you feel about standing up. So you just said, I've had enough, but you're ready to come home. Or you're here and you say, preacher, listen, I'm just ready to give God my heart. I don't want to die and go to hell. I want life in my life. And I don't quite see like everything you were talking about. I didn't quite understand it. Well, you can. If you receive this free gift that Charlie just said, it's called grace. You can't earn what I'm asking you for. You can't earn. You can't deserve what God gives us. You can't do anything but receive it. So right now, if you're here and you say, preacher, listen, that's me. I'm going to lead all of us in a prayer. And if you're a believer in here, pray with all your heart. If you're not, you pray it and you become one. Because this stuff will make much more sense to you. The Bible wasn't written to the lost. It was written to the found. It was written to the believers. So we know how to live and things we should fight for. So would you pray this prayer with me? And if you're not right, let's get right. If you don't know him, let's know him, because you can. Would you pray with me now? Would you pray, Father, I choose to believe in Jesus. And I believe, according to your word, that he's your son and he is Lord of all. So with my heart, I choose to believe. With my mouth, I willingly confess, Jesus, be Lord of my life. I thank you for saving me. I thank you for forgiving me. And I thank you for loving me. In Jesus' name, amen and amen and amen. Let's thank God, would you? And folks, can we thank God for Charlie Kirk for being here tonight? Let's thank God for him. Thank you, Charlie. Wow. Hey, listen, 2 things. We have some candidates that need signatures in our foyer. Jeremy Gay, he's running for Attorney General, and Louis Sanchez, who's part of our church, running for CD1. He's out in the foyer. They're out in the foyer. If you go by and if you live in CD1, you can sign it. Let's get people who believe in our Constitution that God elected. Can we? So on your way out in the foyer, go stop by their tables. If you're not sure, they'll let you know if you are, and all you have to do is sign. And that's simple. God bless you. Thank you for being here. We'll let you know when Charlie's coming back.